Hi, welcome to Numeric's video blog, your expert source for derivative trends and topics. I'm your host, Jim Jockel. Joining me today is Senior Vice President of Financial Engineering, Meng Lu. Meng, welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't we just kind of jump right in? You spoke on a panel focusing on pricing dynamics of Brazilian debt instruments. So why don't we just start there? Perhaps you could give us a little bit of a recap of some of the discussions during the panel.
Sure. So this conference in São Paulo was about derivatives, loan and bonds in Brazilian market. And there are a couple hundreds participants in this conference, very well organized. And there are a couple of kind of takeaways from this conference that I learned. One is that due to the very high interest rates in Brazil, around 13%, which is the equivalent of the US LIBOR rate. So that's quite high. So the local players, in order to achieve the return they want to achieve, they actually don't have the need to go abroad to achieve that kind of return. They can just stay local. That's one thing that I learned. The other thing is if you look at the corporations who need funding, so these corporations, obviously, they want to pay as little as they can. So for these guys, they actually go abroad to look for cheaper funding. Typically, they can achieve that kind of funding in either in US or in Europe, which is even which has even lower rate in US. So for these corporations, while they can achieve these cheaper funding, but the other thing that they have to be concerned about is the FX risk. Obviously, there's no free lunch, so they have to do the FX hedging when they bring the money from abroad to Brazil.
So one of the other elements that seems to be on the rise is the issuance of COCOs coming back to the Brazilian market. What is it about the market that has made it right for this type of debt instrument?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. There's a dedicated session just for that topic, and they literally flew someone all the way from Singapore, DBS, to talk about this thing, and with a few local people. So if you look at a convertible bond, which is definitely not new, US market, European market, they have had convertible bonds for many, many years. What's slightly new is this so-called contingent convertible bond, also called COCO. If you compare the traditional convertible bond versus the contingent convertible bond, the difference is that for the traditional one, when the equity market is doing well, the bondholders has the incentive to convert. But for the COCOs, it's just the opposite. The right to convert actually belongs to the bond issuers, whether or not that's a financial institution or another, just a regular corporation. So obviously for these issuers, they only want the conversion to happen when the equity is not doing well, just the opposite as the regular convertible bond. So what we have learned is that these COCOs have been becoming quite popular in Europe and in Asia. For whatever reason, not so much in US. And one of the panelists talked about literally Brazil just issued, one of the Brazil corporations just issued the first COCOs ever in Brazilian market. And there are lots of discussions about the pricing aspect of it, the legal aspect of it. So lots of discussion because this type of instrument seems to be pretty new in Brazil, and there has been quite a bit of interest in this new product.
So one of the challenges, I think, as it always relates to the Brazilian market is the distinct elements of the profiles of derivatives, whether it's the calendars, conventions that are very unique. Within COCOs, is it more of a standardized cross-border type product, or are there other distinct features to the Brazilian market?
COCOs tends to be quite bespoke. Every one of them is different. And there are different kinds of features that the bond issuer can build into the terms and the conditions. For example, under what condition the issue can convert, forced conversion, and there's barriers that you need to hit, things like that. So this is definitely not a standard product.
And are you finding discussions around transparency in terms of whether it be documentation or understanding payoffs, where of those conversion elements being built in and kind of more prolific from the last time we've seen COCOs come to market?
The transparency is one of the key topics people are interested in. For example, one of the bonds that I've seen is that this essentially the board of director can determine when they will force the conversion, and that determination obviously it's a little bit arbitrary. You don't know when they're going to hold the meeting, when they're going to decide that they will force conversion. However, from a modeling perspective, you can actually approximate the situation, i.e., under the scenario, for example, equity goes down a certain level, then it's likely, very likely, that the board of directors will determine the conversion. So that kind of thing can be modeled to a certain extent, even though it's not, it's not a black and white, kind of thing.
Well, Meng, I thank you so much for joining us. And of course, as we see the continued proliferation around COCOs, we're going to have some more questions. So I do hope you'll join us again.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you, Meng. And of course, on the Numerics video blog, it's our goal to examine the topics that you want to talk about. So keep the conversation going on LinkedIn and on Twitter @NX Analytics.